First, Effie will discuss whether a democratic deficit exists in Europe or not.
Thank you. The Treaty of Lisbon is an international agreement which amends the two treaties that form the constitutional basis of the European Union. The Lisbon Treaty was signed by the European Union member states on 13 of December 2007 and entered into force on the 1st of December 2009. It amends the Maastricht Treaty and the Treaty of Rome. The Parliament has been a big winner of the treaty since it has increased its power, unlike to the Commission and the Council of Ministers, who lost their dynamic. Nevertheless, despite the changes that have been introduced, the democratic legitimacy is still a controversial issue. The Treaty of Lisbon defines the democratic foundation of the Union, which are based on three principles: those of democratic equality, representative democracy, and participatory democracy. It declares that in all its activities the Union shall observe the principle of the equality of its citizens, who shall receive equal attention from its institutions, bodies, offices, and agencies. However, the last years, more and more people talk about the democratic deficit and doubt about the European Union democracy. The democratic deficit with the European Union is the idea that the governance of the European Union in some way lacks democratic legitimacy. The term was initially used to criticize the transfer of legislative powers from national governments to the Council of Ministers of the European Union. In 1979, David Markham first introduced the democratic deficit, referring to the European Economic Community and claiming that the European Parliament has democratic deficit since it was not directly elected by the European citizens. The European Union faces the problem as long as its lack of accessibility and representation to the ordinary citizen and lack of accountability to the European Union institutions. The European integration has meant an increase in executive power and a decrease in national and parliamentary control. There is also a shift of political control from democratic parliamentary systems of government on national level and executive central systems at the European level. A deficit future is that there is a confusion in the separation of the institution functions, since there are two executive bodies, the Commission and the Council of Ministers, which also has legislative powers. The powers at the European level have been concentrated on bodies that have been elected by the Europeans, that have not been elected by the European citizens, such as the Commission, which consists of persons who have been appointed by national governments, and their great potential that these two have makes them set aside the national governments. The European Parliament is elected directly by the voters and for that reason is the most democratic institution. However, it is weak, has not the same power with the executive institution and as a result is unable to control them. Parliament's only responsibility is to adopt or to reject the decision that the Commission makes. A further reason that the democratic deficit exists is the council structure. Since there is no democratic control in this legislative institution and accountability, we cannot talk about transparency and democracy legitimacy. In order to overturn this deficit, the council powers should be reduced with parallel control during decision, promoting for that way the transparency. Furthermore, since the European Parliament is the link between the Union and the citizens, the enhancement of its role would contribute the democratization of the European Union. To sum up, the European Union suffers from the democratic deficit. Although the Treaty of Lisbon has contributed a lot in the democratic legitimacy, there are still some problems that the Union ought to solve. Both the executive and the legislative institution must be reliable to the European citizens in order to promote their participation. Thank you.
The second speaker will be Alexandros, who will discuss the effect of the European Union's moving closer to being a single state on economic liberties.
I would like to begin this little speech with what my American friends call a blast from the past.
The Commission does want to increase its powers. Yes, it is a non-elected body, and I do not want the Commission to increase its powers. So, of course, we are differing. Of course, the chairman or the president of the Commission, Mr. Delors, said at a press conference the other day that he wanted the European Parliament to be the democratic body of the community. He wanted the Commission to be the executive, and he wanted the Council of Ministers to be the Senate. No. No.
Well, I guess we all know that speech, don't we? The actual question is, why was Baroness Thatcher so much against the European Union? Was she afraid of losing the national sovereignty of Britain? Yes, of course, that was a danger. But to my mind, that was not the main danger. What was she so much afraid of was losing all her efforts throughout her premiership. What she tried was to stop statism, stop state intervention to the free market. She was so much afraid of losing that to the European Union. She was afraid that the European institution would eventually reintroduce statism and regulation to the markets. Was that a realistic thought? Well, I think yes. The European Union was based on some very firm principles. Those principles mainly concern free market and free trade between the nations. And indeed, that was the case for the first years of the European unification. However, steadily, European Union began to move towards regulating certain fields of the European markets. The common agricultural policy is quite an example of that. Mrs. Tillaku will make a very certain reference there later. But this is just an example. It has happened many times, and the European Union has moved toward regulating more and more fields. Instead of being a power of deregulation and a power promoting the free market, in many cases it has done the exact opposite. I was discussing just a few days ago another example. It's the political pressure forced by the Union of German ship owners, who are right now trying to promote a unified tax project in Europe in order to promote their competitive advantages over Greek ship owners. I think that these few examples give us a clear statement of what is going on in Europe. The more the European Union is moving towards a federal state, the more it runs the dangers of introducing regulation to the market, just like national states have done up to this point. Of course, one might say that if the states are to regulate, then it is better for the European Union to regulate instead of them, since the European Union is, after all, based on the principles of free trade and free market. And after all, there are certain legal safeguards within the Union. At this point, I'd like to remind you of what happened in the case of Euro and the Eurozone. In that case, there were safeguards concerning national economies and national fiscal statistics. But this principle was soon overridden, and guess by which state? Germany, actually. Germany was the first state to override the principles of the Eurozone. So my point is that the more we're moving toward federal Europe, the more the European Union will become a state intervening to the markets of the national states. In the end, the European Union runs the danger that national states run, only maximized the danger to intervene to the markets. What I propose is moving back to the past, actually moving towards a confederation. What the European Union needs is a free trade zone between the states, the liberty of people and workers to move Europe, and that is all we need. Dr. Stein talked about a relationship between the states and Europe. Well, there might be a relationship, but we do not necessarily need that relationship to be a full commitment relationship. It could as well be a friends with benefits relationship. Thank you. Thank you.
First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for attending today's event, and as a local coordinator for European Students for Liberty, I would like to thank personally Dr. Stein and Fríndrichs Nάουμαν Institute for affording us great support in all our ventures last year in Greece. So, to begin with, free competitive markets are a core value of the European Union, according to its treaties. Being an important actor in a globalized market economy should leave no room for doubts as to whether insisting on protectionist measures is a counterproductive policy or not. Nonetheless, it seems that the policy instruments deployed by European Union's legislators contradict overtly European Union's market orientation. State interventionism as a response is actually a response that politicians could be considered to be the proper one to what is called market failures. State interventionism is manifested in several ways and is actually encouraged by European Union's legislation following failed patterns of the past and failed patterns of the policies adopted in the past by the member states. For example, states subsidized enterprises, rescuing failed banks, which are not necessarily too big to fail, and industries are not the only instances. As Alexandros mentioned, I will mostly focus on common agricultural policy and its implications on the European and globalized markets. Common agricultural policy, being one of the oldest policies of the European Union, is strongly rooted in the European integration project, furnishing a wide range of interventionist provisions. The thing is that most of the times interventionist policies are nothing but a temporary stopgap which deepens structural deficiencies or even create new ones. It's needless to mention how state interventionism distorts competition not just within member states but also between European Union and third parties. Looking closer to the common agricultural policy, we can extract valuable conclusions as to the effects of interventionism in the market operation. The product-based financial support to farmers, which means that subsidies were handed out based on the type of farm commodities, changed decisively the way farmers will take decisions. Farmers who were rational enough so as to choose in view of maximizing their profit will choose the type of commodities whose production will yield the highest subsidies. The misallocation of resources had in its way multiple negative effects in the environment and global economy. Additional infrastructure was needed so as for farmers to adapt their cultivation methods to the motives provided by the European Union. In Greece, some traditional cultivations were dramatically reduced, like sugar, while cotton production, which is a very water-consuming production type of cultivation, rocketed. Ignoring market signals created huge surpluses and overproduction, and so we needed millions of euros to support exports or to dispose them at considerable cost. This bore a huge impact on third countries who could not compete with the artificially competitive European products. And they were artificially competitive because they were funded with taxpayers' money. So even more competitive farmers for third parties like Egypt or countries of the third world could not compete with the products of European Union farmers. Apart from that, administrative and monitoring costs are huge. A great part of the money was slashed to what we call sleeper farmers, farmers who were not active in agriculture, agriculturally active. And in Greece, we know something about how many farmers got extremely rich and bought expensive cars and everything, just taking advantage of European Union subsidies. So perusing the overview of common agricultural policy reform, we feel that there is still much to do so as to cope with the problem of interventionism. Moving, for example, to a producer funding scheme, according to which the state hands out payments to farmers for producing public goods, instead of encouraging them to develop their own risk management mechanism, for example, is not a policy compatible with a free market vision. Securing 35 or 40% of their income creates a strong bond between farmers and the state, which is not self-evident why it is beneficial for them and the totality. In any case, it is the taxpayers that will eventually foot the bill. European productive dynamics will be revived only if we allow intra-European Union competition to function in parallel with global competition. Quotas, subsidies, and state funds do not seem to allow the things to move in the right direction. Protectionism hasn't worked at a state level, and there seems to be no substantial evidence why it should work at a supranational level. When liberals ask for less state intervention, it doesn't go by itself that the powers from which the state was deprived should be conferred to European Union on any other supranational scheme. So thank you very much for your attention.
So we shall begin with what Effie has mentioned, namely the democratic deficit from which the European Union suffers. Actually, we have to go to the past to see what were the principles over which the Union was stated. We were talking about 4 freedoms. We were talking about a free market. We were talking about free trade. The Union was actually founded in order to promote the free market, not to hinder it. Actually, the concentration trend that characterizes the Union, which is depicted, as Mr. Stein has stated, in several directives regulating matters from the type of the charger of our mobile phones to the length of the cucumbers. I really believe these things, I highly doubt these measures help promote the free market. The deficit, since before the Lisbon Treaty, the European Parliament had no particular role in the legislative procedure in the Union. However, we can't believe that one cannot be persuaded that the democratic deficit is being reduced through a more active role of the Parliament. Actually, the members of the European Council, the Council of Ministers, are members of the states' governments. However, these members do not come back to their national parliaments to talk about what they've said there in Brussels. Well, and I highly doubt there is an effective way that the Parliament can control, can check what the ministers have said there. So the real solution to the democratic deficit is the delimitation of the power of the Council, of the Union as a whole. Furthermore, as for the federalization, as for what Alexandros has said of the political union, the political integrity, well, I believe that as liberals, as a liberal, one should take notice for the protection of individual rights and the protection of free market. And one should not pay attention to how there's, to the way that these ideas are being protected, but to the way power is being enforced, but to the amount of power that is being enforced. If a federal Europe can ensure individual rights and free market to every single European citizen, wherever he or she may be, then okay, this is our choice. We choose for a federal Europe. Our main concern should be the less intervention of a state organ to our political, our social, our private and our economic life, our economic sphere. If a model that is called federal can assure us that, then that's okay. Furthermore, about the Euro crisis. The Euro crisis is a paradigm of how catastrophic politics can be sometimes. In 1997, the states have signed the Growth and Stability Pact, in which no one could find a mechanism for regulating, solving crisis. There was no provision for states in crisis in the Growth and Stability Pact. This was done because the then leaders of the European Union didn't have the political courage to stand and ask for the democratic. They didn't have to ask for the confirmation of the real consequences of a monetary union. Well, and as it has been said by liberals many times, the voters of the future do not vote now, so they postponed it. And Angela Merkel and the rest of the European political leaders came in 2012, 2011 to build a whole mechanism called the EFSF, having well, they actually showed some political constraints. They lost much time, and it was. However, they did it. They created a mechanism that no one has ever. That the real constructors, the initial constructions didn't make. However, that is a paradigm of how what a problem can the political system create to the economy, to the whole economic system. Furthermore, the current crisis, not only the European, the global economic crisis, has underlined a fact that the banks, the financial system, especially the European system, is a bankruptcy is really close to a state bankruptcy. When a state bankrupts, then the banks that are located in its soil have a problem due to the extreme amount of state bonds they have. Well, I believe that, and this is a proposal that is not from me actually. The banking unit, the unification of the banking system. The banks seek relationship between states and banks shall be brought to an end. States cannot finance their client evasion through private banks. States cannot blackmail their central banks, their central banks through their imminent bankruptcy in order to be financed. And I believe that we should copy the United States, and that Europe should copy the United States in that field, where Washington has the primary and the final word as regards the bank. So there should be a European mechanism, a European institution with strictly defined powers. Not powers, strictly defined jurisdictions. Banks are going to be. Banks couldn't be blackmailed actually. In the banks, we mean we all have accounts in banks. Every person has a right for his private property not to be played, gambled through clientelistic state. As an epilogue, I'd like to talk a little about the Euroscepticism that governs the European Union these days, actually heading to the elections. As I've said in the beginning, we should go back to the past. History is there for this reason, in order for us to remember, in order for everyone to remember what has been carried out and why the world is the place that we live now. Well, Europe was definitely not the place that we live now before 50 years. The reason why the community of coal and my English was the World War II, was the prevention of another war. We shall bear this in mind. Well, memory plays a significant role in how people behave. If we lose the memory of what has Europe been before the Union, and we choose for a nationalistic and whatever, the great problem is the nationalistic Euroscepticism who have the primary vote, the greatest percents. If we forget that, we may be bound to live this again. So we have to remember. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of remarks, like to kick off also the discussion. I thank for very many ideas that you mentioned, but I think we should, especially as liberals, also think about, do we want to abolish Europe as a union, like some liberal libertarian friends do, or give us as a recipe, or do we want to make it better? At one point you mentioned that history is a good teacher, and I think there we should remember that the whole project started not as a free market project, but with quotas for steel, with subsidies for agriculture, and the free market, or the free market period of the Union started much later, at the end of the 80s, and not at the beginning. I think you rightfully mentioned the role of the member states, and I don't know how Greek farmers are. In Brussels we see a lot of French farmers who are claiming for more and more subsidies, and I think there, as liberals, we fully agree. We should get rid of subsidies, and that's why the Commission has the power to restrict subsidies to industry, which is better than a lot of member states are doing. Member states are easy in handing out subsidies, which is also one of the reasons why public debt in member states has risen so high that the euro came into trouble. The euro did not came into trouble because of the European Commission or the European Parliament, but because national politicians were so irresponsible that the public debt in the member states skyrocketed. And then, yes, the rules that we gave us for a problem in the Eurozone were violated by Germany and France in the first. And we were not strong. Our politicians at that time were cowards and not strong enough to apply the rules that they had given to themselves, actually in reality. So, and therefore, I think that liberals should claim and argue in favor for a European Union that is based on the rule of law, where politicians and their activities are restricted, where we have a separation of powers, but where we also attack those who make the wrong decisions by their name. And in very many cases, it's the national politician, and it is not the politician acting on a European level. One of the great economists, I think, was Harold Demsetz. I think he studied in Chicago and then went on to lecture in LA. And Harold Demsetz once said, as liberal economists, we should not commit the grass is always greener fallacy. Meaning that we paint like an ideal picture, then compare reality with this ideal picture and say reality is wrong. So European Union is wrong because in the best of all our liberal worlds, and I'm also one who would love to live in such a very liberal world, and Baroness Thatcher was a great prime minister, reducing the power of the state in her own country. But we should not compare an ideal world with that what we have, but with the alternative. And the alternative to a European Union where 28 member states are cooperating with each other would be 28 national governments with politicians implementing more and more bureaucracy, setting up frontiers again, implementing tariffs to gain more revenue. That would be the alternative to a Europe where we work together, united and in cooperation. And there I think that 28 national bureaucracies is worse than trying to get rid of bureaucracy on the European level. There I think that a control institution with regard to public subsidies, like the European Commission is one, is better than having subsidies on 28 national governments levels. And there I think we should all aim to make this Europe better, less bureaucratic, with a higher democratic legitimacy, so less power for the Council. And that should be the aim for us in the future and for a common and united Europe.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stein. At this point, Athanasios Kyrios will summarize the whole event. After his speech, we welcome any comments or questions from the audience. However, because we're on a tight schedule, probably comments shouldn't exceed 2 or 3 minutes. Mr. Kyrios.
Okay, for some reason, Mr. Stein's comments covered much of what I wanted to say, because in order to expand a free market, in order to expand national markets, what countries used to do was wage war and conquer other places. So with the European Union, we have a single market, Europe-wide, where no barriers exist, and in order for no national governments to be able to put those barriers against in place, tariffs, subsidies, protectionist measures, we do need supranational rule, a supranational institution, and that is the role we want the European Union to play. Conversely, when we do have such supranational institutions, this means that national governments are not free to set their own agenda, to liberate the economy if they wish to gain a competitive advantage. For example, we have a current trend in the European Union from the socialist group, members of the European Parliament. They want to establish a common lowest denominator for European income tax, similar to what Alexandros mentioned with the ship owners. Greece, which needs shock competitive measures in order to regain any sort of advantage so it can get out of the crisis, it would be hampered from doing so if such measures were instituted. And of course, if we work at a supranational level, then what we see is competing lobbyists, not only from different industries or trades, but also from different countries. It is not uncommon for stronger countries to be able to lobby measures that are better for their own national industries, or for example, the way that France actually bullied itself in order to gain much more subsidies for the farmers. That's a very typical example. Other examples are regulations, for example, for solar panels at the time that they will mainly produce in Germany. So the Germans would come in the European Parliament and ask for regulations imposing solar panels in order to actually help their own industry. So there are both sides of the coin, and adding to that, we have a situation in which we have a strong bureaucracy in Europe, and we do have a lack of accountability, which of course leads to overregulation. But the fact that we have a lack of accountability is not only an institutional issue, it's also an issue of the way the European electorate is behaving. Because actually the European electorate controls both the governments it elects, which form the European Council, which is one part of the legislative procedure, but it also elects the members of the European Parliament. We have elections in a couple of weeks, and we see the way the debates are going in Greece, and I don't know what's happening elsewhere in Europe, but I imagine it's not very different. Very few issues of actual European integration, very few issues of actually how the European Union should be are discussed. Instead, we're focusing on domestic policies. Greece, of course, has the issue with the Troika, so Greece's relations with the European Union have been reduced to paying back its loans and nothing else. We don't think of anything else when it comes to Europe. Asking for more money, asking for more loans, and asking for relief of these loans. That's the whole thing about European policy we're discussing, and we're calling this European solidarity, when in fact it's not. I don't think liberals should be in favor of a Europe where the taxpayers of one state substitute for the taxpayers of another state. If Greek authorities, and again on this I should agree with Mr. Stein, wanted to spend that much, they should impose that burden on their own taxpayers, so the taxpayers themselves, that is us, Greek voters, have an incentive to vote them out of government and vote somebody else in. Instead, what we're doing is that we're asking that the German taxpayers, the Portuguese taxpayers, the Cypriot taxpayers, who also have crises like us, the Irish taxpayers, they bear the burden of our own fiscal responsibility. And we call this pan-European solidarity. We think that this is the new role of the European Union. I don't know, I don't think that that's a very liberal perspective. All in all, I think we had a very interesting discussion showing both sides of the issue. I think that the European Union is a reality we cannot escape without great harm to our economy. So what we should focus on is how we should build accountability within institutions and accountability from our own behavior. If we want a liberal Europe, it's not an issue of who has the power, rather, but how much power any form of state has. And that's what we should fight, reducing the power of the state at any level as much as possible.